Welcome to the RCA, the Inside Out talk, the first one of the season. Thank you, Beata, for joining us. My name is Dr. Tania Lopez-Winkler. I'm a senior lecturer at the Interior Design program in the RCA. I'm kind of stepping in today because the head of program, Graham Brooker, could not make it, and he sends his apologies. And but I just wanted to take. We really wanted to introduce the Inside Out, and I think because it's quite an accomplishment of the program. I think, and it's not the program, it's not our accomplishment. It's the students. I think we are very proud of Inside Out. Inside Out series of lectures started initially as something that was organized by tutors, and at some point we started noticing that we decided who was coming or what we thought it was interesting, and then students were not really showing up into these gatherings, and so we were asking, it was a moment when we decided to give, the responsibility as the students, okay, so tell us who you want to, and then we give you, you manage it, right? And they actually took on to the challenge, and they did beautifully, and they've been doing it so throughout the years, and it's one of the things that we are most proud in the program, apart from the work that our students produce. And so thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Stephanie. You are for organizing the talk. Stephanie is kind of leading the organization of Inside Out. Is that correct? Yes? The team. Well, the team. Leading the team. And thank you, guys. Again, let's see how we're going to keep this. We need to keep this running next year. So, thank you. Thank you, Jen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming, and welcome, Beata, to the RCA. I'm Stephanie, and I'm a second-year interior design student at the Royal College of Art. I'm part of the Inside Out team. There are 5 of us: myself, Evgenia, Alex, Mauricio, Phoebe, and we curate and organize bi-weekly lectures where we invite internationally renowned designers to discuss their work. We hope that the conversations in the lectures would incite, enliven, and allow ideas to cross-pollinate between diverse design disciplines. We hope to differentiate ourselves from other lecture series by shifting the conversation away from something that is really polished to honest conversations that confront the realities of being in industry. So we encourage designers to talk candidly about their career decisions, pitfalls and all, and we asked them to share their advice and personal experience about getting started in the field, valuable lessons learned, and share any professional insight. We have an exciting lineup of speakers this year. And our next one is with Adam and Maria from Vitruvius in 2 weeks in this room in November. And to stay up to date with future events, please follow our Instagram at RCA_interior design. For tonight, our first lecture of the year, we have Beata Heuman. Born in Sweden, she set up her London studio in 2013. Her work is known for being original and playful, and she has amassed a significant following with her creative interiors and positive approach. Beata launched her online shop called Shoppa in January 2020, selling a range of her own fabrics, wallpapers, handles, lighting, homewares, and furniture. And in March 2021, Beata published a best-selling book called Every Room Should Sing. In this lecture, Beata will share insights on making a career as an interior designer and drawing on her own experiences. She'll focus on finding your own creative eye, unlocking the imagination and sources of inspiration, as well as practical and less glamorous elements of such as getting a job, taking risks, and dealing with difficult clients. And please join me in welcoming Beata to the stage.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and yeah, welcome everyone. It's so nice to see you all here, and yeah, thank you for turning up, and yeah, it means a lot to me. When I was first asked to do this lecture, the first thing I asked was if it could be a little bit more of an interview situation where I was asked questions that I could answer, which is basically a lot easier. The answer, unfortunately, was no. This is the first lecture that I've ever given, so I have to admit to feeling a bit nervous. But sometimes I actually seek this feeling out. I think if something makes you feel nervous, it's a sign that you should do it and that it's worthwhile. So here we are. You have to excuse, I'm holding on to some papers tonight, so that will be my lesson for next lecture, to do a lecture without papers. That's the next development for me. So giving a lecture rather than being steered by questions by someone else also means that I get to choose what I talk about. And I decided that the most useful thing was kind of going through what I've learned so far and the insights I've had in the almost 20 years I've been working as interior designer in as honest way as possibly can. And basically to take the edge off what is essentially this sort of rambling stream of consciousness, I am going to do it in chronological order. So, during the next 40 minutes, I'll share conclusions that I've reached. I'm going to start off talking about how I first got into working in interiors, then a bit about when I started my company and business, and then I'll talk a bit about where we are now and, my thoughts on design, a bit more sort of philosophically speaking. I actually don't have too many images, but this will be in the background, just in case you get bored by what I'm saying. Something nice to look at. There's some more pictures to go through as well later. But this is a project that we finished in Germany a few years ago. I'm going to finish off this lecture by giving 3 bits of advice, and then after that there will be some opportunities to ask questions. So, how did it all start? I kind of entered this world of interiors as on a banana peel, as we say in Sweden. And fresh out of school, I only enrolled in an interior design course at another London design school, which shall remain nameless, to escape the deli where I was working, because the course was subsidized by the Swedish state. So basically, studying interior design meant that I didn't have to work, and that was kind of my main motivation for that decision. Basically soon I grew pretty bored and I wasn't learning a lot. I think I was complaining about this at a family function of my then boyfriend's, and this person happened to know someone called Nicky Haslam. I had no idea who Nicky Haslam was. I suspect some of you in the audience probably don't either. But anyway, I went to see him and he pretty much hired me on a whim. He read on my CV that I had worked in an old people's home, and he just said, "Oh, great, you can look after me then." And that was that. And I stayed there for almost 9 years. So in the beginning, I was, of course, extremely green. When you enter the workplace, you'll have this amazing education and tools to use, and I suspect a great deal more mature than I ever was. I had grown up endlessly rearranging my room because there was nothing else to do in the middle of nowhere in the countryside where I grew up in Sweden. And I also obsessed over my doll's house. Having little to do is actually quite important for creativity, I think. And I had to keep myself entertained, thinking up games, drawings, and I read a lot. My parents would drag us 4 children to art exhibitions and old houses. And then after I finished school, I lived in Florence for a year, studying arts amongst other things. So I had this interest and knowledge of the arts, and I was very curious, but I had 0 experience in the field when I started working for Nicky. I have actually always news that I would never have hired me if I was in his situation. But actually, as our business grows and it's a bit more stable and solid, I have a great team in place already. I'm much more open to the idea of taking a chance on someone, and I think it's important to shake things up if you can. Anyway, I had just turned 21 when I started working at Nicky's. So at first, I was just answering phones, booking deliveries, placing orders, and that kind of stuff. And then I was asked to do some research for some classical sculptures that we were doing for a Russian client. And because I think my time that I spent in Florence, I sort of did a good job on that. And then I was given more and more things to do. Soon I was the assistant to Colette Vandertillet, who was Nicky's right-hand woman. And she had no problem delegating. And she also left me completely in charge when she went to her native Canada for the summer. She was kind of checking in on me, sometimes via fax, but she also trusted me with a huge responsibility. And I have basically never even had a job before. I wasn't particularly hardworking at school, but I think for whatever reason, I kind of rose to the challenge. So I didn't want to let Colette down, I didn't want to let Nicky down. And I really hate feeling stressed, but as it turned out, I thrive on having lots to do. And I really enjoy problem solving. And it was this kind of combination of the task, which the organizational side, the design, and even the maths really did something for me. And I realized, although I hadn't sorted out, I found my calling, and I never looked back. And that job really was my training and my education. If I had to pick 2 standout things I got from my time at Nicky's, the first one would be Nicky's fearlessness and openness to what could be used. Once we were unpacking boxes for a big project that we were installing in Chelsea, and Nicky fished out this piece of multicolored foam that I think had wrapped one of the antiques. He had it framed, it was floating in a box, he put it over his living room sofa, pleased as punch with his DIY Pollock. Another time, when installing an extremely high-end apartment in Moscow, he took one of the rubbish bags, which was this quite beautiful sort of woven green recycled materials, and then he lined the shelves of the client's fancy china cabinet with this rubbish bag. We were sadly asked to remove the rubbish bag lining in the end because the client didn't quite understand, but I absolutely loved it when Nicky did things like that. It was unexpected, freeing, funny, and inspiring. I think interiors can become quite dull without these moments of irreverence. And you want to inspire people to be, if you want to inspire people to be open-minded, you need to include the high as well as the low. You need to keep people on their toes, including yourself. And I think creativity dies a little if everything becomes predictable. And I think the truth is that most people are quite preoccupied with what's right and doing the right thing, in particular when it comes to their home. I think compared to maybe a piece of clothing, your home feels like much more sort of permanent, and therefore people tend to play it safe. And as a studio, we've kind of carved out a little niche for ourselves where, we have clients who are intrigued by the unusual, but it's basically always important to bear in mind that you have to reassure clients and you have to push them. And it can be quite a job to get someone to agree to something on uncharted territory. But unless you push ideas and take those risks, there can never be any progress. I think that's really important. And the other really big takeaway from Nicky's was his wealth of knowledge of the decorative arts, which he imparted on us all. And we had this extensive library of reference books. Most of them were designers from the basically early 20th century. And to this day, I constantly refer to these greats. I think there's no better way to develop your own practice and adapt your style than learning from the achievements of the past. So in that spirit, I'm just going to quickly share with you a little stop tour of some of the people that I really like. Most of them introduced to me by Nicky. I don't have too much time to go through everything in detail, but if you don't know about them, jot down the names so you can look them up later. So there's Elsie the Wolf, who is the lady down in the left-hand corner. As you as you can see, she's a hoot. Many say that she kind of invented the profession in interior design. I've included that little drawing in the middle. That's of one of her rooms, and to the far right you can see how that inspired us to put a mirror behind the bedside chest in one of our projects, was in the far right. And her whole style was basically a reaction against her sad Victorian upbringing, and she for that reason hated William Morris. It's quite funny. Then Sean Michel Frank, who possibly could be said to be the first minimalist. So he's lived in Paris. Began around the 1920s, he also kind of liked. He was a minimalist, but he also liked a bit of the exotic, and he did some amazing collaborations with people like Giacometti and Dali. And then Cerimon, she was the same kind of time, sort of started in 1920s. She borrowed £400 to open a shop in 1922, and 10 years later, in the 30s, she had a shop in Chicago, London, and New York. Quite cool woman, and she was actually famous for her love of white. But then in the 30s, it took a little bit more of a drastic turn towards colour, which is what I quite like about her. Madeleine Castan, maybe it's one that you have heard of. I actually went to visit this house, and these are my pictures from a house, the two sort of ones in colour, called Saint-Suspire, which is incredible, where Jean Cocteau spent a lot of time, so he's done all these murals. And I just really like to sort of see the situation at the bottom as well, which is also a room I had. And then my biggest source of inspiration is Joseph Frank, and this is the only one out of those 5 that I already knew before I started working for Nikki. But I thought this was quite interesting. He basically went to this 18th century house in Sweden, which is at the bottom there, by this Swedish botanist called Carl von Linné, and he had this idea of putting all the botanical prints as wallpaper in his bedroom, and that inspired Joseph Frank to do this set for the Golden Gate exhibition in '39, which you can see at the top. And this is his flora cabinet, which he also did at the time. Same sort of idea with the botanical prints that are currently, I was looking it up, actually fetches around 100k on the market. So it's been quite a success. Coming towards the end of my time with Nikki, moving forward, one sort of quite formative thing in a way is that I took out a big mortgage and bought my first flat, which needed doing up, which is this one. And the project I did with Nikki had huge budgets, so trying to do it myself was a completely new challenge. I had high expectations, but basically no money, and I'm not entirely sure how I did it. And it forced me to be really resourceful. And if you're ever faced with a project that seems impossible to pull off, remember that there's always a way, there's always a solution. And I would make my own artwork lying on the floors, like everything that you see here, I just did. I would trawl the internet for hours and hours. I would travel to mills to buy discarded, misprinted fabrics for nothing. And realizing that it wasn't all about money, and that the lack of money can actually really open you up creatively, and that I was capable enough to pull it off, basically gave me the confidence to start thinking about setting up on my own. So I had just turned 30, and I felt like, well, I had achieved what I could at Nikki's. So in the end, it came down to a girlfriend of a friend of mine asking me if I would help them with their house. I discussed it with them, I shared some ideas, I worked out what I would charge, and I negotiated it all. Once it was signed and agreed, I knew that I would be okay for a year financially, even if I didn't get anything else. So I handed in my notice. On the 1st of January 2014, I started working on my own. I had the one project and a few grand in the bank off that project, and that was it. I was working on the one pretty wobbly table in my tiny flat, which is the one you can see here on the right. And I had not appreciated the reality of running my own business. It's a bit embarrassing to admit now, but I didn't even know how to set up a professional email, so I had to ask a brother of a friend of mine to help me with that. And I did feel like I had a lot of experience when I started on my own, and in a way I did. But there was also this side to it that I hadn't fully grasped at all, and it kind of smacked me in the face. it's a bit like having a baby. By the time you realize what it means, it's like too late to change your mind, and you keep going because you have to. There's a lot of paperwork that you don't have to deal with as an employee, and that admin side was all-consuming, confusing, and overwhelming in a way that I had not anticipated. That said, all of a sudden, what I thought of as work became my whole world, and it was so meaningful and exciting, and it became the most important thing to me, which was extremely fulfilling when things were going well. And also, as much as I loved working for Nikki, I really relished to run things my own way. So this is an image of that first project that I did. And I grasped every opportunity in those first years. My husband would be talking to random lawyers at school reunions, and a few days later, I'd find myself sitting in the living room, helping them with colours, charging more or less nothing, as I was so grateful for the chance. And I went down some quite strange paths. I got another big project a few months in via word of mouth somehow, and it was a new house being built in North London. It was a great project of paper. We were working with the top classical architectural firm in London, and there was huge scope for doing something interesting with the design. And I really liked the client. Unfortunately, we had the project manager from hell. The project manager was trying to skim money off the top for himself, I suspect, and he got the talented architect working on the project fired to be replaced by a mate of his. Somehow, me and the Swedish girl, who was my first employee, was in charge of doing all the drawings at a level that we weren't expecting at all. And if this happened today, I would just say no. But at the time, this project manager basically bullied us into doing something because he was making us feel as we were inadequate and not delivering as we should. And this was despite the fact that my contract clearly stated that we wouldn't, for example, do shop drawings for joinery. I remember one night when we didn't even go to sleep because of a deadline that this project manager insisted on. And in the end, the client changed her mind that it didn't even build the house. And in my opinion, that's because the project manager just ruined the project by firing every single decent consultant on it, other than us, although he tried to do that too. But the silver lining is that because I was trying so hard to deliver what he asked of us, the level of our drawings got a lot better. And it was also useful to have the experience of getting really upset and stressed whenever he was pushing back on something, feeling like it was the end of the world. And then in the end, the house didn't even get built. It's actually made me a lot better at seeing the bigger picture. Every time something bad happens, it sort of gets a little bit easier to deal with it when something similar happens next time. And it's not the end of the world, it's going to be okay, and don't let it ruin your day. There'll be lots of difficult people along the way. Could be a client or a builder or a product manager, even a colleague or an employee. And it's not unique for this industry, obviously, but I do think when you work in residential design, there's a sort of professional layer that seems to just fall a bit by the wayside. It's easy to be taken advantage of for that reason. Like, we don't have the REBA stages, and there's no universal framework for how you run an interiors project, as far as I'm aware anyway. And that also makes it a lot harder to say no when someone tries to take advantage of your goodwill, particularly when you're first starting out. And as the principal of an interior design firm, you kind of have to come up with your own method, both in terms of how you charge and also how you deliver. For me, at least, that's taken a really long time to work out. There's a lot of trial and error in the beginning, and you just take what you can get in terms of projects, and you just try your best. I think the only thing that really matters is that when it doesn't go quite as you had hoped, you just take some time, you analyze what happened, and you try and really think about what you might improve for next time to avoid a similar situation. So you kind of turn a negative into a useful lesson. And there will be a lot of them, so that's also why it's quite good to work for someone else before you set up on your own. So as the years went on, we slowly but surely got more and more established as a firm. My lucky break really was this first project. And firstly, the client wanted to do something different and unusual. I actually had to bring them in. And the secondly was that my supportive client let me publish the project. So this project ended up on the cover of House and Garden, and that people will see it and they'll remember, and next, when they are at the point of hiring a designer, hopefully they'll think of you. There were also not that many other young designers at the point when this happened. It was about sort of 9 or 8 years ago. There was a sort of older guard, but this anyway in London, but it was much more sort of proper English decoration. So I think it was a quite open playing field for us, and the press really liked our story. Colourful and bold, it's a grabbing image, and it was obviously not costing the earth. So I think it felt accessible, and we got a lot of press, which helped a lot in the beginning. Another project that we won early on, or should we jump into this, was this tiny house in Maida Vale. The entire project, including the building works, was just over 100k. I think the client had come across our work in House and Garden. And when the budget is tight, you kind of just have to make the most of it. The example here is, for example, is this marble backsplash. If you're going to do a stone work, to be very specific, but if you're going to do a stone workshop, it always has to be made bespoke and cut to the specific measurements of your site. So you might, our idea was just kind of add this kind of rounded shape at the top, and it was really successful, but it kind of didn't really cost anymore. And, despite the fact that there was little money in it, it seemed like a good project to me, and it was. It was a challenge financially, but what was good about it was that the client implicitly trusted us and that it was the right fit. And I ended up doing this bold work, like I'm saying, because I felt that was the kind of best thing to do with not that much money. Paint costs the same, whatever color it is. And in my opinion, it's so much better to do something like this, where you at least feel inspired and the client appreciates your efforts, than something which may be a lot more lucrative, but essentially without personality. Sorry, that's another picture of the same project. And our projects are much bigger now, but this has instinctively been my guiding principle, and it's served us very well. I also way prefer doing a project where you can be in charge of all the details and do the entire thing, no matter how small the flat is. As opposed to tweaking some elements in a grand house that's been designed by someone else whose style you don't really like. What makes us happy and inspired is having that complete control. It is basically so much better than when we work this way. If we work with a home partially done by someone else, we just end up feeling uninspired and resentful, and that's certainly not very good for our client. It's important to work out what matters to you and what makes you feel happy in the work that you do, and trying to stick to your principle. In my opinion, even if it means turning things down that can potentially make you more money, so be it. From a design perspective, the whole thing just dies if the main motivation is money, I think. So I worked out what kind of project brings out the best in me and the team. We didn't want to stretch ourselves too thinly. I personally want to be completely involved in all the design decisions. We want each home that we do to be original. We want to avoid a cookie cutter approach as much as we can. I want to focus on getting better and better at what we do. And it was really clear to me that the more we had on, the more projects we were doing, the more stressed I would feel. Just doing more projects will bring in more money, but doing fewer will keep the quality higher and bring in less money. So I made the conscious decisions to keep our portfolio small, to ensure that the work is as good as possible and we have proper time to give each project. It's a work in progress. I don't always get the balance right, but at least I know what we're aiming for. With a team of around 6 and me working in the interior side to side, the idea is that we don't do more than 5 to 6 projects, maybe less if they're really big. And what also makes this possible from a financial perspective is our product line. So as of this year, the revenue from the product line has overtaken the revenue from the interior design side. And this could, of course, fluctuate from time to time, but having these 2 streams of income in the business puts a lot less pressure on each side. If one side is less strong across a few months, we don't have to relentlessly chase sales, as hopefully the other side is doing okay. I'd be lying if I say that this was part of the plan when I first launched or started selling products, I started selling our marbleized velvet as I had made some for a project and I liked it. So that's what you see at the end there at that sofa, and that's I just thought it fit in the room, so we printed some. And then I shared an image of it on Instagram. This was about 7 years ago, and I only had like a few hundred followers, but one of them worked at Vogue, and she asked me to send some to their HQ. I had a roll of 10 meter, which was just lying on the floor of our office, and if anyone bought some, we'd cut it up and roll it up ourselves and send it out, which was a real pain. But anyway, as the years went on, we started selling more and more, but it was a slow burner. Like I added a few other projects, and it was always things that we made bespoke for interior projects anyway. If we made a sale, I was pleased, but it wasn't my main source of income. So as long as it was moving a bit, I was happy. And eventually, with my Instagram following growing, things were really picking up, and I made my first full-time serious hire for that side of the business in the autumn 2019. So that's just a selection of some things. About a year after that, the autumn before COVID hit, I remember we were out of stock of a few products and missed out on quite a few sales because of it, which frustrated me greatly. We hadn't placed an order in time, and so we'd be out of stock in the months leading up to Christmas, which are the busiest in terms of sales. We were also planning to set up our Shoppa as an e-commerce site in January 2020, and it coincided with us being on the Architectural Digest Top 100 list in the US for the first time, so I knew we'd have a lot more traffic to our site. Because we had this slightly disastrous situation being out of stock, I was trying to learn from our oversight, and we sat down and we did some homemade forecasting. How much had we sold in 2019 compared to 2018? How much had it grown? And if it grew by the same amount in 2020, how much did we need for 2020? And then we placed a whole year's worth of stock in November 2019, just to avoid being in this annoying situation again. And that was very lucky because manufacturing then came to a halt when COVID hit. And we had a full year's worth of stock, and all of a sudden people were sitting at home and ordering things for their home to a greater extent than before. So that's a very good example of learning from a mistake, which in the end I'm very grateful happened when it did. We couldn't really buy a year's worth of stock in advance today. Our product line has grown and it would be too expensive. But the idea is that we still buy as much as we can afford to keep in stock. And it keeps prices down, it reduces work, there's less internal stress, and it also works a lot better for our manufacturers. Anyway, selling products, as you can hear, is a whole different ball game. It's a very useful thing to have. You can become relevant to a much bigger audience. If we have 6 interior design clients at any given time, we have thousands of people placing orders on Shoppa. Shoppa is a lot more scalable and not having to stress out too much, even if the income stream from the interior design side slows down, because we have this here instead to support it. But it is a business in itself, and it requires a lot of thought and dedication. And I have now my husband John in, who helps run that side along with a small but wonderful growing team of 3-4 people. And even if the shop is more scalable, it's still really important not to lose our integrity. So we don't sell anything wholesale for this reason. We only sell things on our own website. We don't take investment. We improve the business only using money that we actually make in the business, be that by hiring or releasing another product or buying stock. We never do big collections. We release one product at a time because that's how we design. And I'm sure the reason why companies release big collections is because it makes more money. But I also think it kind of means that a lot of things get released just for the sake of it, which I want to avoid. And we're never going to be able to compete with the huge conglomerates, but for us, it's a lot neater to lean in, just doing small scale really well, and not having to be quite such a slave to margins and targets. And the big pro is that we have the freedom to do whatever we want, since we only have ourselves to answer to. So, moving on to something different. If someone asks me to describe my style, I always struggle to answer it. I have a few words up my sleeve, because it's quite a common question, but always falls a bit flat. Whatever words I might choose, what's interesting is how being in the room makes you feel. I love doing different things. I don't want to be predictable, and no two clients are always the same anyway. The most important thing to me is that we keep agile so that we can adapt to any given set of circumstances. At the moment, we're very consciously choosing projects that are quite different from one another to broaden our horizons. One thing though that I think is almost always true, which is always true about our projects, is that there's a big mix of different styles. So this is the kitchen in the same project that the previous picture was. We have liner floor, 19th century Danish dining table, modern Swedish chairs, French chintz on the bespoke love seat, a jam fireplace in Palladian style, and a pendant by Gubi designed in the 60s, and a vintage Tuareg rug from Africa. This is a picture of a house. Don't actually have too much to say about this one, but this is an open plan living space, which you've seen on the presentation of the talk as well. But yeah, it again has all these different influences, which in a way maybe shouldn't go together, but somehow does. Anyway, at least in my eye. And you know, sort of the thinking behind this is that we are all this complete mix of different influences and ideas, memories, likes and dislikes. In a residential setting, I think you need a fold that allows you to be all these different things that make you. And we feel different times of year, and you know, we'll be happy, we'll be sad, and you need this kind of backdrop where you can let all of that take place. And I think if you go for a uniform look, no matter how beautiful, it can quickly feel quite static and dull. You want things that are cheap, say from IKEA, and you want things that are really special too. You want things that are old and things that are new. I really value having fun and laughing, and to me having room to entertain you in a sense is also really important, which I think people don't think about so much. The rooms you spend time in affect you a lot, and it can inspire you to be the kind of person that you want to be, when you get it right. And I also think that no matter how beautiful the room is, it's completely unrealistic to expect our clients never to want to change anything. We all crave change, we all want something new. So basically, by doing something like this, it means that it can really take being added to over time, and it won't look out of place if you know, whatever you bring into this. I can talk quite a lot about what makes an interior good, but yeah, I've written a whole book on the subject, so you can read that if you want to hear a bit more on it. Looking at all these photos, it does strike me that most people's impression of what being an interior designer means comes from static images. And these days, those images are almost exclusively on social media. And I'm guessing most people in this room has formed an impression of our work from social media. Without social media, I would not have been able to build the business in the way that I have. At the same time, it takes you, these pictures tell you very little about what it makes to design, what it takes to design a comfortable, livable room. It tells you about how to make a room look good and interesting in a picture, but it doesn't bear that much relevance to designing a room that is good for the person living there. More and more people want to do interior as a career, and I often think it's because of the currency these images possess. It makes it look glamorous, and the truth is that there are some extremely unglamorous parts of this job. As much enthusiasm as I have for the profession, the reality of counting up how many pants someone owns and how to fit them into their knicker drawer can get a little dreary. There's a long list of examples like this. For me, what keeps it interesting after almost 20 years of doing this work is the want to kind of resolve everyday problems, wanting to make it easier and more efficient and more comfortable, and of course also exploring creative expression, trying to find a good mix between what is appropriate for a certain place and at the same time challenge the norm just enough to create a little bit of tension, carefully observing and reading a certain space, seeking both balance and a dissonance, and make sure it's extremely comfortable and practical at the same time, and also make sure it's within budget. Working with makers, constantly trying to learn more, say, about upholstery or joinery or lighting, taking some risks creatively and not being afraid of making mistakes, If you never make a mistake, it means you're playing it too safe. And to be totally honest, I think maybe the biggest hook for me is the fact that I'm a shameful snoop. I'm interested in psychology and relationships. These projects takes often years, and people's homes are really important to them. You find out a huge amount about people during this process. You're often dealing with couples, and they may not always want the same thing, and they definitely don't always say what they mean. And even if you have a difficult client, if you can figure out how to handle them and make them happy in the end, it can be extremely satisfying. It's the fact that you have to adapt every time you meet someone and sort of hone these interpersonal skills, which makes it so endlessly fascinating to me. And I feel extremely lucky to have found something that I love so much and continues to challenge me in so many different ways. Of course, I do not always get it right, and I constantly question my own decisions, and I turn things over in my mind. There's always the next hurdle, and like then the next, and you think you want something, and then you get there, and then there's something else that you want, and you kind of barely take a moment to celebrate your achievements. But I also think that's an inevitable part of being creative and being ambitious. If I was completely at ease with everything I did, I'm not sure I would have the drive to push it all forward. I think that's probably what happens one day as you get older, and this constant need to develop just ebbs to one side, and I'm sure that will be pretty nice. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that you should make the most out of where you are right now and that drive that you feel. Most of you are at the very beginning of your careers, and I think if you're feeling any insecurities, try and use them to your advantage, and make the most of it and use those feelings and anxiety to actually spur you on, because there's something really good in there. It comes from a good place. And I did offer to give you 3 pieces of advice in the end, so here are 3 quick takeaways. The first one is extremely practical, and it might sound like a very obvious point, but we have been reading through hundreds of CVs this year, and it happens less than you might think. So if you're applying for a job, write a good short cover letter. Don't talk about how the prospective job will be good for your personal development, but focus on how the business will benefit if they were to hire you. Put in a few personalized sentences about why you like the business you're trying to join, and that will greatly increase your chances of getting an interview. Number 2, let your insecurities drive you. Operate outside your comfort zone and scoop up the lessons. If you make mistakes, see it as an opportunity to grow. I'm not the first person to say this, and I know it's a bit cheesy, but when I look at all the mistakes I made, they have taught me so much more than when it's gone my way. Number 3, if you do want to set up on your own, you need to try and figure out what integrity means to you. It will become clear through trial and error and doing the work. Once you've found your version of integrity, stick to it. Whatever happens, you can take pride in that you have stayed true to what you believe in, and I think the chances are that the authenticity of what you're doing will lead to greater success. And that's it from me. Thank you so much.
For such a vulnerable discussion. We're going to open this up to questions, and we're going to prioritize the questions from students, and we're also going to be moderating questions from Zoom.
Hi.
Hi.
When you started on your own, you've been working, I think you said, for 9 years?
Yeah.
So you'd already probably developed a bit of a style by then of what you called your style, yeah? And so I'm wondering, how did you, when you were offered work, stick to your style as opposed to the style of your client? And was that something you did from the beginning, or did it take you a long time to do that?
I think it took me quite a long time to work out exactly what that expression should be. As I said, I was pretty lucky because the first client I had pushed me in a certain direction that just sat very well with where I was interested in going. But it takes time, and you just kind of have to go with your gut feeling. I also think if you work in residential design, you have to be quite flexible. So you shouldn't maybe it's not completely true, but I always tell clients that it shouldn't be about us, it should be about them. I think there's like probably the truth is somewhere in the middle, but I think it's important to be flexible and be able to adapt enough for the client to still feel like they're very much part of it. And I think that's basically what a good interior designer does. And if that doesn't work, I think it's probably not the right fit with the client, basically, I would say.
We have a question from Zoom, and it's, do you have any advice for people transitioning into interior design from a different field?
I think, it's quite crowded, but I actually, as an industry, but I think if you're willing to basically do anything, try and get your foot in the door in an interior design firm, and like don't be snooty about what you do. And I think if you're sort of a hard worker, sensible, have the right attitude, you can go very far. You just have to get your foot in the door and don't like worry about what the exact description of the job is, and then you can figure it out from there.
So you mentioned that since your business sort of developed, you're now more open to taking chances with people. What would you say would it be that would make you more open to taking a chance with a particular person?
I think it's a feeling. It's, you meet them and you have chemistry. And I think when you hire people, it's not going to, they won't tick every single box. You sort of have to go a bit with your feeling and that you like them. There's a spark, and if there's a spark, you can figure other stuff out. So that's sort of what I go for. So I can't tell you exactly what that is, but it just happens when you have chemistry with someone. And that I think is actually more important in a way than someone's, experience.
Hi, thank you for that. So you use colour incredibly liberally and lots of different colours in lots of different contexts. I have a bit of fear around colour. What's your starting point when picking a colour in any context, actually? And probably more importantly, how do you know when you're done?
I think we lay it all out. So when we design rooms, we pretty much go down to the tiniest little details normally, and we just sort of put all the. It can start with different things. It can start with a fabric or an image of something that inspires us, but we just keep adding to it, and we add only things that enhances something else that's already there. It's a little bit like I think how you might think about doing an oil painting or something like that, and you add a little bit of something, and that's when I think sort of something sings, when you get that kind of combination of things right. I have to think looking at art has helped me a lot. I just grew up looking at art a lot, and I think that's just sort of in me somehow. It's quite intuitive how we do it, but I think it's good to just put lots of samples and colours on the table in front of you and see how it all works together, and add things when it looks exciting, take it away if it's not adding anything. And that's how we do it. And then I think it's also important to look, that's just one room, but it's also important to look at the whole house as a whole. You want there to be a reason to go, it needs to be cohesive, but you also want it to be a reason to go into a particular room. So the mood has to be quite unique. So it's, as I look at the house, try and get a balance as a whole and add something in a particular room that you perhaps don't have in another, if that makes sense. But just, I would just put lots of colours on the table, lots of different textures, and go with your gut feeling.
We have another question from Zoom, and it's about what your thoughts are on the relationship between psychology and design, given that you said that you liked knowing more about your clients' personalities and how that plays out in the room.
Well, for example, the one that I was showing you before when I was talking through the kitchen, when we were doing, basically you can sit and talk to them, you can ask them questions, but it's more just getting a sense of who they are, no matter what the answer is. And then you have to sort of try and create a fold that works for their lifestyle. Maybe this is not so much psychology, but perhaps a bit more habit. But for example, that other product that I showed you, I could see that they were quite messy and they would never keep it super tidy. So then you sort of try to create a backdrop that can take a bit of mess, for example. And it maybe not always, that also has a lot more, maybe not so much with the design, but a little bit more how you handle them throughout the process as well, and how you present them, and how much you push, how much you insist. Sometimes it's much better to take the back seat and not say too much in the beginning, and sometimes it's better to be pushy. So it's less to do with perhaps the expression of the design and a bit more how you handle them throughout this sort of 2-year process that has a lot of different winding turns in it.
we have quite a few questions from Zoom, and so we'll just continue from there.
Yeah, there is a question on Zoom, and I'm also very interested in it. So at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about your experience working for another designer and their design process. But now, can you tell us about your design process? Maybe there are some interesting stories you would like to share.
Yeah, it's quite a big question. But I guess one quite big thing that we do that maybe people don't do as much as we do, but if someone calls us, first we just work out whether they are happy to pay what we think we charge, basically, for it. So that's kind of the first conversation. It's a bit uncomfortable, but if they're not up for it, there's no point in spending like lots of time. We don't have that much time. We're quite thinly stretched. And then once we've established that they're serious and could work from that perspective, we will actually do kind of in-depth presentation, but we'll take a few rooms, design them how I just described, in great detail, and we do kind of a pitch, and we don't actually charge for it. But only when we establish that it's serious. So we give quite a lot in the beginning, and then that kind of means that if you do win the project, you're almost halfway there, the trust is established, you already figured out the cost, you have a really strong direction. So that's something that I think works really well that we do. And also that thing depends a bit on the product, but we prefer to design rooms like completely, even though it's not really necessary at that point, rather than just do paints and then do joinery. We just think of the whole picture in one go as much as possible. It's not always possible if builders need things much more quickly, but yeah, we have quite sort of holistic view of design, and that's kind of our approach. Our answer is just like a small part of that question, but.
Another student there. Do you have a preference between clients who come to you and have quite a clear direction or imagination of their own, or those who basically give you free rein and say, actually, I have no clue what I'm doing, here's the budget, go?
It depends on the direction. So if it's something that I'm really into, that's great because they're really excited and they really appreciate design a bit more. And that can be fantastic because they really believe in investing and they're really, their heart is really in it. But, if someone's a bit less involved, that's also quite freeing and it's a bit easier to get on with the job. But again, I quite like the mix of both those types. And it's interesting that it's not always the same. And they both have kind of pros and cons, I would say. But you just have to kind of try and adapt to what they like. But that's what's so interesting about it as well, and see it all as a sort of interesting challenge because people are all very different.
How do you manage the boundaries when you're doing a project? Because especially when you are new and keen, you are willing to do things. I could see some people taking advantage. I heard of interior designers do a whole pitch, as you said, and then some people steal the ideas and then they do it with someone cheaper. So, you are willing to give much more at the beginning, but then how you stretch yourself?
Well, I think this is something I was struggled with a lot in the beginning, and I'm sort of only really getting to quite a good, point with that. But I think basically we do quite sort of rigorous screening before we get to that point in terms of what their expectations are. We meet, just figure out whether they're really serious. And you can sort of tell. You get better and better at it. But even if you are in the beginning, I was definitely taken advantage of a few times. But in a way that was kind of good. I needed to work, and it was good to have the experience. So you just have to be a bit sort of. Don't let it happen too much, but maybe it's a bit inevitable in the first few years. And obviously, you need to make money, and if that's what's on offer, the more projects that are offered to you, the more picky you can be. But if there's not that much on offer, you just have to take whatever you can get, obviously, and I think that's okay too. And it's just kind of part of the journey. But obviously, don't make a habit out of it. And if it's gone too far and you feel like you've been taken advantage of, obviously, you just need to put your foot down. But it's not that easy. But that's what you should do.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I've got a few questions actually, but anyways, doesn't matter. How do you decide how to terminate a project with your clients, and how do you bring them to an end?
What you mean, if it's not working or just in general?
No, in general, how do you cut their umbilical cord support that
I mean,
client?
we sort of have an agreed scope to begin with, and it's like sort of relatively sort of clearly defined. And then there's also like a time limit to it, which always goes over. And we normally we give quite a lot, and we're happy to go over a bit. But like at some point, you can sort of draw a line, like maybe charge another design fee. But and also just be quite specific about this is actually out of the scope. And it happens most times we have a fixed design fee whilst we do the main project, which includes a lot of details. And then at the end, we probably charge, maybe they want to do some artwork or something extra at the end, and then we will charge that on an hourly basis. So it's just define what's within the scope and within the timeline, and then when that's done, you just have to say that you need to charge more and charge up front. Yeah, because then you have the power.
Thank you so much, Beata.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.